What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Here's the part that should make Moscow extremely uncomfortable. For decades, Kaliningrad was presented as Russia's untouchable Baltic fortress. This heavily militarized exclave surrounded by NATO countries, packed with Baltic Fleet facilities, air defense systems, missile infrastructure, and enough propaganda mythology to make it sound like nobody would ever even dare to touch it. And then suddenly, Khrabrovo Airport in Kaliningrad had to suspend operations because of a single drone threat. Not even attack, threat. Not Belgrade, not Kursk, not occupied Crimea, not some border town where Russian citizens have already been forced to treat alerts and airport restrictions as their new normal. No, Kaliningrad, Russia's westernmost territory, sitting between Poland and Lithuania, roughly 360 kilometers away from mainland Russia, and much closer to Europe than Moscow would ever want to admit. Rosaviatia, Russia's federal air transport agency, announced temporary restrictions on arrivals and departures at Khrabrovo Airport, officially saying that this was done to ensure flight safety. While the Kaliningrad Regional Emergency Warning System announced a drone threat alert, which basically means that the Russian side confirmed that something serious enough was happening in the sky to interrupt the entire civilian operation aviation systems. The restrictions reportedly lasted about an hour and a half, and the so-called carpet cover plan was introduced. Aircrafts were reportedly circling and unable to land, and according to available reporting, this appears to be the first time ever since the beginning of the full-scale war that Kaliningrad's civilian airport officially stopped operations because of a threat of drones. And that is why this story matters, because Kaliningrad is not just another Russian region. Kaliningrad is a military symbol, a Baltic Fleet base, and also a place where ordinary people have spent generations living closer to Europe than to Moscow. So when drones reach Kaliningrad, this is not just about one airport pausing flights for 90 minutes. This is about the war touching one of Russia's most sensitive strategic nerves. And people who were reportedly already cautious about Putin and his policies suddenly became even more distanced from the capital of their own country. And just like that, a joke referendum that showed that 97.7, some people say 97.9% of Kaliningrad residents wanted to be out of Russia, and suddenly this joke stopped being funny. In the Kremlin's version of reality, Kaliningrad is supposed to be the place that makes NATO nervous, not the place where Russian officials suddenly stop civilian flights because of a simple drone warning. Khrabrovo Airport is the main civilian airport serving Kaliningrad, and when Rosaviatia announced restrictions on arrivals and departures, the official explanation was careful and extremely boring. Guess what? Flight safety. No panic, no details, no dramatic statement, just that classic Russian bureaucratic fog where something is clearly happening, but everyone pretends that the situation is completely routine. But then the regional emergency warning system announced a drone threat. And that changed the meaning of the whole story, because now this was not simply an aviation procedure. It became part of the same reality that more and more Russian regions have been forced to face since 2022, which are alerts, restrictions, uncertainty, and the slow realization that the war is no longer something happening only on television. The restrictions lasted around an hour and a half once again, then Rosaviatia announced that normal operations had resumed. No official information was released about explosions or air defense activity or even possible damage in the Kaliningrad region. And maybe even nothing visible happened, but this does not erase the political meaning of the airport closure, because if the threat was meaningless, then why stopped flights in the first entire place? This is especially important because Kaliningrad is not supposed to be part of this category. Russian airports in central and border regions have increasingly had to suspend operations because of drone threats, yes, but Kaliningrad was always different. This was supposed to be the distant Baltic stronghold, the military outpost, the Russian shield in the middle of the NATO territory, not just some another region where ordinary passengers suddenly discover that their flight depends on whether the sky is considered safe or not. The bigger point here is simple. The war has reached even one of Russia's most distant and politically sensitive regions. Kaliningrad was supposed to observe the war from the side, maybe suffer from sanctions and transit problems, maybe deal with economic inconvenience, but not experience a direct drone threat alert that directly affects civilian air traffic. And once that psychological line is crossed, it is extremely hard, if possible, to ever go back. People in Kaliningrad now know that the region is not outside the war, not protected by propaganda, and not even protected by the fact that it is surrounded by NATO territory, because that geography does not only make Kaliningrad dangerous for Europe, it also makes Kaliningrad vulnerable for Russia. Before going further, guys, please subscribe to our channel if you find these videos informative and educational. Also, if you want to directly support our work and get extra content in return, please check out our Patreon, the link is down below. Thanks so much. Now let's continue. Now imagine this, you are Moscow, and you have a region that is legally yours, military important to you, politically symbolic to you, but physically separated from the rest of your country by NATO and European territory. That is Kaliningrad. It is roughly half the size of Belgium and home to about 1 million people. It borders Poland and Lithuania, sits on the Baltic Sea and is located 360 kilometers away from mainland Russia. Before the end of the Second World War, it was part of Germany, and its capital was known as Königsberg. In 1945, at the Potsdam Conference, the Allies agreed that the Soviet Union would retain the territory, and it became the part of the Russian Soviet Republic under the name Kaliningrad. During the Cold War, it was a heavily militarized Soviet outpost on the Baltic Sea, but back then the map itself was different. Poland and East Germany were part of the Warsaw Pact, Finland and Sweden were neutral, and NATO's presence around the Baltic was much more limited. After the Cold War, NATO enlargement changed everything, and after Finland and Sweden joined NATO, the Baltic Sea became almost entirely surrounded by alliance members, with Kaliningrad and the Russian mainland shore near St. Petersburg as the main exceptions. So yes, Russia's access to Kaliningrad is complicated. Overland transit depends on routes through Lithuania and either Latvia or Belarus. Maritime routes across the Gulf of Finland and the Baltic Sea are nearly 900 kilometers long. Air travel has to avoid NATO airspace. And to the southeast sits the Suwalki Gap, a roughly 65 kilometer stretch along the Polish-Lithuanian border, which is the only land link connecting Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania to the rest of European Union and NATO. This is why military planners care so much about the area. For Russia, Kaliningrad is a key military stronghold and logistical hub, home to Russia's only ice-free port on the Baltic and the main base and command center of the Baltic Fleet. For NATO, Kaliningrad is a heavily armed Russian position sitting deep inside the alliance's strategic environment. And for Poland and Lithuania, this is not a theoretical what if Russia gets closer to us scenario. No, it is right there, on the border. But here's the catch. The same geography that makes Kaliningrad useful also makes it fragile. It is close enough to threaten NATO countries, but separated enough from Russia to be hard to reinforce. It can host missiles, aircraft, raiders, naval assets, military facilities, but in a major crisis it can also be isolated, pressured or cut off entirely from easy support. That is the contradiction at the heart of Kaliningrad. It is both a sword and a hostage. And that is exactly why the drone alert at Khrabrovo Airport matters, because it exposes the insecurity behind the fortress image. This next part is crucial, so guys, please pay close attention. Because Kaliningrad matters not because it is big, but because of what Russia placed there. In 2018, Moscow permanently deployed Iskander M missile brigade with around 12 launchers in the region. Kaliningrad also hosts Ha-35 and Onyx anti-ship missiles with upgraded ranges of up to 300 kilometers. In 2022, Russia stationed 3 MiG-31 aircrafts capable of carrying Kinzhal hypersonic missiles in Kaliningrad. So together, the Iskander system, described with a range of up to 1000 kilometers, and the Kinzhal with a range of up to 2000 kilometers, place targets across northern and central Europe within reach. Both systems are nuclear capable also, and Russia has nuclear storage facilities in Kaliningrad, though Moscow says it has not deployed nuclear weapons there, but, well, I'll leave it up to you who to believe. On the defensive side, Russia has placed Panzer S-1 and S-400 air defense systems in Kaliningrad. The S-400 can intercept targets as far away as 400 kilometers away under ideal conditions. Russia also has a Voronezh DM early warning radar installation in Pioniersk, and it has discussed adding a 29B6 container over the horizon radar system with a range of up to 3000 kilometers. So yes, on paper Kaliningrad looks serious, but here is where the propaganda image starts cracking. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine drained forces from many regions, including Kaliningrad. The region's garrison reportedly stood at around 20,000 personnel at the beginning of 2022, but according to one European official, Russian ground troops there declined by 80% after the war expanded. Moscow sent units of the 11th Army Corps, which was responsible for defending Kaliningrad, to Ukraine in 2022. It also transferred 3 of the Baltic Fleet's major landing ships to Sevastopol, also before the invasion, and some modern S-400 systems may also have been moved away to support operations connected to Ukraine, or probably to defend Putin's dacha. So yes, Kaliningrad still has strategic systems, but the manpower picture is now much weaker than before. The missile threat remains, the symbolism remains, the military importance even remains, but the fortress may not be as strong inside as Moscow wants everyone to believe. Meanwhile, NATO has strengthened its posture. In 2022, the alliance decided to scale up eastern flank battle groups deployed in 2017, including those in Poland and Lithuania towards brigade size. NATO ground forces in the Baltic region reached around 22,000. The United States leads the multinational battle group in Poland and maintains also about 10,000 troops there on a rotational basis. In Lithuania, the German-led battle group was integrated into Germany's new 45th Armored Brigade, which has reached 1,800 personnel by February and is expected to grow to around 4,800. Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania together could field around 136,000 troops with rapid mobilization, while Poland alone could add around 550,000. NATO also deployed systems like Patriot, NASAMS, SMPT and Sky Sabre to reinforce air and missile defense. In 2024, NATO held Steadfast Defender 2024, its largest exercise in decades, involving around 90,000 personnel. In January 2025, it launched Baltic Sentry to protect critical infrastructure under the Baltic Sea. And Moscow sees all of this through the darkest possible lens. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko claimed in an interview with Izvestia on November 5th that NATO exercises include scenarios for blocking Kaliningrad, while Sergei Naryshkin, head of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, accused NATO-aligned European countries of openly preparing for conflict with Moscow. So each side says it is defending itself, while the other side sees preparation for something bigger. In the middle sits Kaliningrad, armed to the teeth, difficult to reinforce, surrounded by NATO, and now forced to choose and close the airport because of a single drone threat. So no wonder its residents had enough of Putin's shenanigans and started thinking about actually separating from mainland Russia. Now here's a little twist. One of the most famous recent stories about Kaliningrad was not a missile deployment or a NATO exercise. It was just an internet joke about giving Kaliningrad to the Czech Republic. After Russia staged fake referendums in occupied Ukrainian territories in 2022, social media users responded with their own mock referendum asking whether Kaliningrad should join the Czech Republic and be renamed Královec. The joke claimed that 97.9% of Kaliningrad residents supported joining Czechia. Some people repeated the number as 97.7%, but, well, the meaning was the same. If Moscow can invent referendums to justify taking someone else's territory, then the internet can invent one right back at them. And guess what? The joke exploded because it mocked Putin using his own logic. Suddenly there was an official Královec Twitter account with even an official website and the slogan "Královec is Czechia." The fake story claimed that the Czech government signed the Kaliningrad Annexation Act on October 4th, 2022. One report said that the account even had 78,000 followers. Czech Railways, České dráhy joined the joke by announcing a connection to Královec. Rohlik.cz joked about delivery through the Rohlik loop pipe. Then came Beer Stream 1, the imaginary pipeline connecting Czech breweries with Prague, Warsaw and Královec. Brno joked that it had lost its status as the second largest Czech city because Královec now has joined. Sorry. Again, sorry. The Czech Interior Ministry joked about needing an expert on maritime borders. The US Embassy in Prague jokingly asked whether Czechia also... Okay, so what is this? Also needed an aircraft carrier. Even Zuzana Kaputova, then president of Slovakia, said she might consider a state visit and praised the joke for exposing absurdity of Russia's fictitious referendums in Ukraine. On the surface, all this is a comedy, just like me, hiccups. And yes, we have to be honest, an internet referendum is not a real referendum. It does not prove that 97.9% of Kaliningrad residents want to join Czechia. It does not even prove a real independence movement. No, it was just a satire, a political meme, and a digital protest against Russia's fake annexation logic. But the reason it landed so well is because it touched a very sensitive point. Kaliningrad is not like most Russian regions. Its history is different, its geography is different, its relationship with Europe is extremely different. People there live surrounded by European and NATO countries, not by the Russian mainland. For years they traveled, traded, compared and understood that Moscow's propaganda version of Europe was not always, if ever, the same as the Europe they could see literally across the border with their own eyes. And now, after Khrabrovo Airport had to stop operations because of a drone threat, well, that old joke feels completely different. Not because Czechia is about to annex Kaliningrad, obviously, but because the region now looks less like a proud imperial outpost and more like a stranded economy territory caught between Moscow's ambitions and Europe's security architecture. And here is the real reason all this matters. Kaliningrad's future will not be decided by one drone threat, one, airport shutdown or one viral Czech meme, but all of these things together, creating a political atmosphere that Moscow cannot easily control. Kaliningrad has always been one of Russia's most unusual regions. It is separated from the mainland, surrounded by Europe, historically tied to Königsberg, military important, economically vulnerable, and psychologically different from a typical Russian province. People there are Russian citizens, yes, but their daily reality has long been shaped by proximity to Poland, Lithuania and the Baltic Sea, not by proximity to Moscow. After the full-scale war, Kaliningrad became a pressure point. Sanctions, transit restrictions, airspace limitations, and military tension all hit the region differently from mainland Russia. In June 2022, after the European Union's sixth sanction package, Lithuania restricted transit of sanctioned goods to Kaliningrad, affecting around 50%, half of road and rail freight into the region. The European Union restored rail links eventually within a month while keeping road restrictions, but Moscow saw the episode as a dangerous precedent and just how easy it is to isolate Kaliningrad if needed. Russia is also deeply concerned about a possible blockade. Kaliningrad depends on energy supplies from mainland Russia, including natural gas, petroleum and coal, and its also thermal power plants would reportedly last only a few months under a full blockade. Moscow increasingly treats NATO activity in the Baltic Sea, including Baltic Sentry, as possible preparation for isolating the region. Vladimir Putin even warned in 2025 that a naval blockade would trigger unprecedented escalation, and Russian doctrine links nuclear deterrence to attempts to isolate parts of the country or restrict access to vital transport routes. At the same time, NATO's fear is different. NATO planners do worry that Russia, once the war in Ukraine changes phase or slows down, could rebuild its military and test alliance near the Suwalki Gap or the Baltic states. NATO is also watching Russia's stated plans for a force of 2.4 million personnel and increased production of artillery, ammunition, drones, armored vehicles and air defenses. So yes, obviously both sides are worried, but about different things. Moscow fears blockade and isolation, NATO fears a Russian test on the alliance. Moscow sees NATO exercises as preparation for offensive action. NATO sees Kaliningrad's missiles and air defenses as threats that would have to be dealt with in a crisis. And in the middle of all of this, people in Kaliningrad are expected to just sit there and believe Moscow has everything under control. But what if they do not believe this anymore? What if airport restrictions, sanctions, military tension, and these drone threats make people ask a very basic question? Why are we even paying the price for decisions made far away from us and decisions that we did not even participate in taking? That is where the Královec joke becomes politically interesting once again. Not because Kaliningrad is actually about to become Czech tomorrow, but who knows. But because jokes sometimes reveal emotional truths before politics is allowed to say them out loud. People laughed at 97.9% voting to join Czechia because it mocked Russia's fake referendums, but they also laughed because the idea of Kaliningrad belonging more naturally to Europe than to Moscow did not feel completely random. So, what does this all really mean then? Kaliningrad is no longer just Russia's western outpost. It is becoming one of the clearest examples of how the war has changed the map of fear inside Russia itself. A region that was supposed to project pressure outward is now feeling pressure inward. A region that was supposed to intimidate NATO had to stop civilian flights because of a drone threat. A region that Moscow filled with strategic symbolism is now also one of Russia's most obvious vulnerabilities. The airport reopened after about an hour and a half. On paper everything returned to normal, but politically the message was already delivered. Kaliningrad is reachable, Kaliningrad is vulnerable, Kaliningrad is not outside the consequences of Moscow's war. And the people of Kaliningrad do not want to deal with any of that. Guys, if you enjoyed today's episode and want to continue following the future of this region, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Don't forget about the Patreon, link is down below. Thanks so much for watching, see you on Friday. Alright, now watching this video on the Patreon, so it is time for ridiculous Russian propaganda. Okay, so today we have this another posting on the Russian marketplace, most likely wild berries.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.